you. It's good to see all of you. Everyone is smiling, so that means they had a very good week. Um, I have to caution you and let you know if I said something that you believe is not true. You know, when you go to concerts and the singer don't sound good, what do? Anybody brought rotten eggs? Good. No rots. Good. So that means no one would throw anything at me. You will just correct me. Good. This week, this week lesson was about oppression, the background, and the birth of Moses. I think the memory text is so important that we all should read it. At a count of two, one, two. The children of Israel groaned because of the bondage, and they cried out, and their cry came up to God because of the bondage. So God heard their groaning, and God remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. And God looked upon the children of Israel, and God acknowledged them. What what do you gather from this text? This is a very important text. If you, with your own life, how do you look upon this text? What is the text saying?
God is always there for us.
Yes. Anyone else? The text is saying God is always there for us, no matter what we go through, no matter how evil the thing is that we do. God would always forgive us and see us through. He will never leave us nor forsake you. Now, the lesson started with the book of Exodus. The book of Exodus, I always thought that it was all about Moses and Joseph, but there's a big picture here. What do you think the book of Exodus, beginning with this section in this lesson, only this part, what do you think it is telling us and showing us? What it is about? Redemption, deliverance, and final salvation. But we can only have these things by faith. In Christ Jesus is what he has secured for all of us. Go ahead.
I see a lot of grumbling and complaining, but it's not without reason. They are subjugated. They have been turned into slaves. They didn't come into Egypt as slaves, but they were turned into slaves in the process of time
Yes.
because, uh, they suffered oppression because the current domain or the government of the time thought that they were a threat and decided to subjugate them before they became um, a threat that where they would have to deal with from within. So they were being subjugated and oppressed, and the Lord remembered his covenant with his people, with his children, with Abraham, um, who is the father of all of those who were there in Egypt.
Yes. They when they left their land, they left a free nation. They were just going to Egypt because of lack of food. And when they reached there, um, God had already sent Joseph ahead of them to pave the way for them. And Joseph, okay, and Joseph paved the way for them. And the Pharaoh at the time was very knowledgeable about Pharaoh, about Joseph and his people. The problem started was when that Pharaoh died and Joseph died. Now the problem didn't started right after because they had about three more pharaohs in between that time. And they looked and they saw how plentiful the pharaohs, the Israelites were. And I believe that they were very prosperous, maybe more prosperous than the Egyptians, stronger because they had God leading them, even though they were there. Yes, they did things that after a while they started doing, some of them, the things that the Egyptians were doing. But they always have a group that stick to God's rules. They didn't do the things that they see the Egyptians doing because they know it was against God's way of life. So they decided, well, we have to do something about these people. They're getting so strong. Everything they do is prospering. If war breaks out, they will turn against us. So they spoke to the taskmaster, and that's when they start to abuse them.
I wanted to share something on that. So, the reason that the people of Israel end up in Egypt is because Joseph is sent to Egypt by, well, from a human perspective, by his brothers. But
Yes.
from a universal perspective, it was God that had ordained that to happen to save them. And Joseph understood that. So the people of Jacob's family basically come to Egypt because Joseph brings them to Egypt, because the Pharaoh is so thankful that the nation of Egypt was spared from this catastrophe that affected everybody else
Mm-hmm.
except Egypt,
Yes.
because they were prepared, because they had foreknowledge, because they had the gift of prophecy. There's a lot of parallelism that we can draw from this. And so
Yeah.
they knew ahead of time what was coming, and they were able to prepare for that event. And so
Mm-hmm.
that's why Egypt, even within Egypt, the Egyptians lost a lot of property to Pharaoh because Pharaoh would sell them food when they ran out of food.
Yes.
And so the Egyptians themselves basically became enslaved to Pharaoh. But Joseph's family, when they came in, Joseph was the one that was managing that for Pharaoh. So when that Pharaoh dies and Joseph dies, and the people are there in the midst of, the Egyptians, it's interesting, that they started doing the same practices that the Egyptians did. They started mixing their
Yes.
belief and themselves with the Egyptians, and as a result of that, oppression came. Several, um, it was 3 or 4 generations later, and they began to be oppressed as a result of that. So it's very similar to our experience
Yes.
today. Whereas Pharaoh is the equivalent of Satan, who has us oppressed in this world, and we have to remain separate from the world, not be like it. Or at least that's what Jesus
Mm,
calls. So
that is
there's a
true.
lot of different similarities, various similarities in the story that we can draw from.
And you notice that the more that the Pharaoh oppressed the Israelites, the more they increase. And that got to the Pharaoh. You know, every plan that he planned against them, it didn't work. And it says here that the story stresses that the more the oppressors afflicted them, the more they multiply and grew. And this is Exodus 1:12. That is no, that is no matter the human mechanism. God is still sovereign and will save his people even if circumstances appear hopeless, at least from a human perspective. Then came the Exodus. These God's people is in Egypt. Um, what is the meaning of the word Exodus? When they say the Exodus began, what do they really mean?
Hi. Well, I think the Exodus, the meaning itself is to exit, right? To get out, to take them out. God wanted to take his people out from that oppression. But it's interesting that I think we missing the point today of the purposes that God has for us, and we continue to be in the world things instead of seeing God Himself as having a purpose for us to change and to believe in Him and trust Him and have faith. And most of the times we say that we have faith, but when that faith is trialed, when it becomes a trial for us to really believe that we do have the faith, we are put in a situation where we have to decide, and we decide wrongfully. Uh, when the people were taken out from Egypt, from that oppression, they continue to do things that they were not supposed to, and not having that faith and that trust in God.
Thank you. So Exodus. So when would you say the word Exodus and the meaning of it? When did that begin? Where were there and
They had been in Egypt for 30 years, not in slavery, and then 400 years in slavery. And then God said, that's enough. So he made it happen with Moses to get the Pharaoh to let them go. But it was very difficult. Took 10
and
plagues.
good? Now it's
But I wonder if your question is when exactly does the Exodus happen?
yes.
So physically, they leave Egypt in chapter 12. That's when they leave. And it was, according to the scripture, the very same day, 430 years earlier, when they
Right.
came in. So that was God is very precise. He doesn't mince around. And that was extremely interesting. But the process of that Exodus that is fulfilled on that day begins way before that, when God calls Moses.
Right.
Say that loud.
That that was Nisan 14 was the date in the Hebrew calendar. And that very same date, Nisan 14, was the day Jesus Christ was crucified.
Yes.
The evidence of that is the month of Nisan, which is the
First year of the Hebrew calendar.
on the 14th day. That was when Passover was effected, and Christ died on our Passover, fulfilling the prophecy.
Let's go back a little bit of Joseph. Um, when Joseph, you see how God, it was a plan there were two plans there. God had his plan and Satan had his plan. Do you think that God, that was God's way of bringing the people out of Egypt and bringing Joseph to his brother? Do you think that that was God's plan? So you're saying that God allowed those evil things to happen, or he did it so that the Egyptians can come out of, so that,
Yes, God had chosen Joseph to be a representative for him, and he had a lot of lessons to learn. And all the things he went through, God was helping him learn how to become the ruler that he would be, that would save his people.
I think she's asking about the plagues. Are you asking about the plagues?
no, I'm asking, I'm asking about the way that it was done. Joseph sold his brother. Was God had a hand in that? Did he plan that? No, he didn't.
He did not. No,
He
no.
did not plan that. But what he did is use, and he brought something good out of it.
Amen.
And that is how it is within our lives. When we see things are going wrong, sometimes we blame our friend and we blame other people. And we ask God, why did you take my son? Why did you take my husband? Why did you cause me to lose my job? Who is at hand there working? Go ahead.
Yes, and for example, that's why I was referring to the plagues. The plagues can be considered disastrous. A lot of people suffer through it. The last plague, the death of the firstborn, people died.
Mm-hmm.
Was God's hand in that? Well, that was truly, at the end of the day, when you look at it in a deeper level, it was really God was forced into that because Pharaoh didn't want to let them go.
No, he keep
Time
refusing.
after time after time after time, he would be warned, he would not let them go. And every single one of those plagues was addressing a particular deity that the Egyptians worshipped, showing them that they were not gods,
Right.
that they were misguided in their worship, and that he was the only true God. So it was a in mercy trying to show them to repent at the end of the day until they didn't, and the final plague was the death of the firstborn, which is oddly enough a symbolism of the human race, and how God had to give up his firstborn so that we could be redeemed because we didn't want to proceed with any of that.
Yes, that is true. In the studies, go ahead, Bas.
If we are if we are dealing with the lesson study for this week,
Yes.
we need to focus on how God prepared Moses to deal with the oppression and to get the people out of Egypt.
That is coming up.
We are way ahead of that.
Okay.
And how Moses grew up and what caused Moses to go into Midian. God had
Yes.
to train him and prepare him for how we are now in the lesson.
Yes. I just, you know, the story of Moses, how the mother had to protect him. And then, but there was something God, how his mother protected him. And then there's something vital here. His mother trained him for, was it 12 years? Okay. And then he went to live in the high court with Pharaoh. His daughter, could say, adopted him. And he had a whole lot of other training because he was being trained to take over as Pharaoh. But go ahead.
If we look at how God prepared Moses for the oppression that was to come, his whole life system was divided in three sections of 40.
Yes.
The first 12 was spent with his mother, training him in godly ways, preparing him for how he would make his decisions when he had to make a decision between Pharaoh's ways and God's ways.
Yes.
Then he committed murder and ended up in Midian. He had to unlearn all that he had learned in the schools of Pharaoh, so as to be prepared to be used by God for the Exodus that was to come.
Yes. But Moses, when he went out and he saw the two Egyptian, the Egyptian and the Hebrew fighting, and he killed the Egyptian. The book of Patriots and Prophets said, Moses thought that he was supposed to bring the children out by his own hands, his way. They were going to fight and bring the children out of Egypt. That was not God's plan. So in Ellen G. White said in the book of Patriots and Prophets,
Did Moses commit murder when he killed that Egyptian?
did he commit murder? Yes, he did. It wasn't his right to take the life of someone else.
Why would you come to that conclusion that he committed murder?
Well, he saw a wrong being done, and he thought that okay, he had the right to do what he had to do because.
I'm just piggybacking on what you said, that he thought that he was to lead out.
I'm looking for. I missed the page. Ellen G. White in Patriots and Prophets.
Yeah, I'm just piggybacking on what you said.
Yes.
I'm not saying you said something wrong.
Oh.
The reason I would jump to the conclusion that he committed murder, because although he thought that it was his duty, he looked around to see if there was anybody who looking before he
Right.
killed.
Yes.
It
And
was
he hid the body.
It was premeditated, and he hid the body.
Yes.
But when he found out that somebody else had seen him, a matter of fact, one of his own persons, his own Hebrew, said, "Oh, you're gonna murder me like you did the Egyptian yesterday?" He knew that he had to run, because
Yes.
Pharaoh would find out that he had committed murder. He had murdered one of the Egyptians. And then he ended up in Midian, where he had to unlearn all that
Yes.
he had learned in Egypt to become the next Pharaoh.
Yes.
So has to be God's man.
Yeah, I was looking for, I lost the page. I had it marked, but somehow I lost the page where Ellen G. White said, I lost the page. But anyway, it was said. So as time go by, go ahead.
Moses remained in the court until he was 40 years of age. His thoughts often turned to the abject condition of his people, and he visited his brethren in their servitude and encouraged them with the assurance that God would work for their deliverance. Often stung to resentment, and by the sight of injustice and oppression, he burned to avenge their wrongs. One day, while thus abroad, seeing an Egyptian smiting an Israelite, he sprang forward and slew the Egyptian. Except the Israelite, there had been no witnesses to the deed, and Moses immediately buried the body in the sand. He had now shown himself ready to maintain the cause of his people, and he hoped to see them rise to recover their liberty. He supposed his brethren would have understood that now how God by his hand would deliver them, but they understood not.
Yes, that's it. Thank you. Yes. Anyone have anything else to say about Sunday? Sunday, we went to Thursday. Now we will come to the Hebrew midwives. Did- Yeah, but there's something that I want to say about the midwives. Did you notice that their fear of God, and I'm not talking about fear that, oh, he would kill me or that kind of thing. I'm talking about their love for God was, their fear was stronger than the kind of fear that they had for Pharaoh. And go ahead.
The now Pharaoh
Yes.
wanted all the male boys to be killed. So he wanted that done through the midwives.
Yes.
And the decree was made that the midwives should kill all the first all the borns, the male
Yes.
borns, but he should allow the females to live. They respected God rather than the fear of Pharaoh's promise to kill, or what Pharaoh would do. So they did not do what he wanted them to do. They made an excuse, but actually, what it was is that they did not want to commit murder. Did not want to go against what God would have wanted them to do.
Yes, that is true. And they were very blessed because of the decision that they made.
Yeah, and it's as the lesson tells us, Pharaoh was considered God on earth.
Yes.
So here the midwives are choosing to obey the one true God versus the one who claims to be God.
Yes. And there was another point. Did you notice that? Why do you think that every time is always the male child to be killed? What is the picture? What's going on there? Why didn't he kill the girls? He zeroed in on the male child, the boys, and not the girls. There's another incident in the Bible, the same thing happened.
They kill the males so that the family line gets cut off.
That is true. Because I'm sure Satan was there listening when God told Abraham, going back then, that his line with his seed or his line would bless the whole nation. And Jesus came through that line. Beginning from right here, it shows that Satan had a plan to destroy the baby, just like he had with Jesus when he was a baby. And it's always the boys, because he's hoping that he can kill that child, because he knew the earth was, everyone is going to be blessed through that child. They're going to be saved through that child.
The question I would ask is, how would how do we see that God was working with with Moses as a baby to bring him up to where he wanted him to be?
Well, anyone want to answer that question? Could you ask it again?
How do we see God working with Moses' mother and the child, the baby child, so that Moses could be spared and trained to do what God wanted him to do?
Oh, question over there.
Not necessarily a question, but Adam, the promise started with Adam. And through the lineage, the firstborn was always the blessing always came through the firstborn in the family. Firstborn doesn't necessarily mean the firstborn blood. It means the firstborn according to God, because the blessing didn't come through Isaac. It came through Jacob, which was the secondborn. So, and it didn't come through Adam's firstborn. It came through his third, which was the one after, firstborn after Cain killed Abel. So that lineage was always through the promise, through the son, not through the wife, not through the daughter. So the promise came through the male child. Just like Jesus was a male child, it was carried on down through his life, death, and resurrection, and death on the cross.
Question? That's the question.
The question that I was looking for is that God impressed Moses' mother
Yes. Started from a child.
to hide him in the river. And it worked out that the princess, the king's daughter, Pharaoh's daughter, would find him. And that way his life was spared.
Yes.
And he was spared so that he could be trained in the ways of Pharaoh. So when he became an adult, he knew exactly what he was supposed to do, because he already knew
His mother.
what God would have wanted him to do, because he was being trained in the ways of the pharaohs. Had he not been found by the princess, he would have been killed.
Yes, you would. You look at the plan, you will see that God, the devil had his plan and God had his. And it was right down through, God protected that child. He had a plan for him, and nothing and no one could stop that plan from happening. So,
Just to add to that, it's interesting that since Cain and Abel, Satan has been trying to kill that seed
yes,
that was promised that was going to bruise him in the head. And even when Jesus came, he did exactly the same thing. We have a repeat of Moses' experience with the death of the infants, right? Up to under 2 years old. But it wasn't until Jesus was ready to give his life that God allowed Satan to take it, which was at the cross. And even then, Jesus gave his life. He didn't die because of the cross. He didn't die because of any torture that they did on him. He died because he laid his life down. But the object, the purpose that Satan wanted to do was to kill him
Yes.
from the beginning.
Yes.
And God allowed it only at that moment. And that's when the entire universe saw with their own eyes, they witnessed the intent that Satan had in his rebellion. They saw the end result, which was to kill God. So from that moment on, Sister White tells us in Desire of Ages, heaven was eternally secure from
Yeah.
those sophistries that Satan had brought up and the accusations that he had brought up against God himself.
As a matter of fact, Satan had that plan from the time he was in heaven. He wanted to take over and he was jealous. But God had his own plan too. So, as a lesson to be learned here from us as parents, mothers, how important it is for a mother to sit down and teach your children about God. How is important it is to have the morning worship, night worship, buy them books that uplift them and teach them about God. Jesus' mother did it. Moses' mother, she trained him, and because of that training, even though he went to Egypt, we went into Pharaoh's house, when he was there with the flock, that training was right there that his mother gave him. So it's very important to look at what Moses' mother did. You must let me know when my time. 10 minutes? Okay, that's good. If you look at this lesson, you will see, to me, I see a lot about Moses, a lot about Joseph, and all of the top players. But the most important thing I saw was the love of Jesus being played out. And that's the big picture. And we tend to focus a whole lot on what Moses did, and we forget about God there in the background protecting us. No matter what happened, he is there leading us if we allowed him to lead us. Now, going back a little, some people would say that that was God's plan, how the brothers selling him, Joseph going to jail, and but that was not God's plan. That was Satan's plan. And if you notice, even in your own life, you have a plan. God have a plan for you, and Satan has a plan for you. Even in the Bible, everything that God set up, God said, go to church on Sabbath. The Sabbath is my Sabbath. Satan did not choose Tuesday or Wednesday. Where did he put his Sabbath? Sunday, right next to God's. And he has been doing that all along. And sometimes we are so blind, or sometimes we don't see the big picture. And sometimes when bad things happen to us, we blame God. And sometimes when we say, well, why did he let this happen? But sometimes it's a lot because we become stagnant. And God wants us to do something. We won't do it. So he allowed certain things to happen to get us moving. Like he put fire on top of our feet, head, or whatever to get us moving. So we can apply this to our own lives. Question. Go ahead.
I see from the very beginning the third angel, the three angels' message come out of her, my people, worship God.
Yes.
Don't get involved in Babylon. That's the whole. Don't drink the wine of Babylon. That's the whole message from inception of sin. I see it in to separate ourselves from the world and align ourselves with God and His holy law. And men have failed to do that all the way down through time, and I believe that's our whole message even today is not just for the world to come out of her, but for us as Christians and God's people to come out of the world, separate ourselves from the world. That's the message. It's a twofold message. Come out of Babylon is not only meant for the world, it's meant for God's church too. Align yourself with God and His way, not the ways of the world and our false gods and our things that would and our distractions. That's just as much Babylon as worshiping idols is putting anything you put before God as an idol. So we are to separate ourselves from that mindset and take the mindset of Jesus and develop that in our hearts and our lives.
Yes.
And while Brother Ron mentioned that, this morning I woke up very tired and with a headache and just out of it. And I'm thinking, how can living in the city be healthy for anyone? How can anyone who calls himself a real Christian, a true Christian, really enjoy and love living in the city? It's just not healthy. With all those bangings and everything last night, I felt like I was going to explode. I could not sleep. And this is one of the reasons why we have been instructed to get out of the cities because it is not healthy. Not for us, not physically, not mentally, not spiritually.
I have a questions that have been asked, and I'll throw the question to you and get your input. The question was asked, why did God, I mean, He's God. Why did they had to go to Egypt to find something to eat? Why did He keep them in Egypt for so many years? Those two questions were asked. I mean, He's the Almighty. He can do anything. He's zapped like not zapped. He spoke, and the world came into being.
I think from the beginning, the our duty is to be obedient, and if we don't obey God as being that He's the God, that He's God, that He created us, that when He put Adam on earth, it was for us to live eternally, not to die. So I think we put ourselves into that position by the choices that we take. So we're gonna have consequences of our choices and decisions that we make. God puts it to us easily if we think of it as being obedient to Him and doing His will. But the problem with us is that we tend to do our own will and not His.
In Exodus 20, verse 5 says, "For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children to the third and fourth generations of those who hate me, but showing mercy to thousands to those who love me and keep my commandments. How many generations were they in Egypt? 4. They, if you recall the history of the children of Jacob and everything they did, warranted or unwarranted, God is a fair and faithful God. They had to pay for that. They murdered an entire city. If you remember the incident with Dinah, they might have been justified in it, but they had no right to take life. And several other things that had happened before that, God allowed it, but now it was time for them to basically pay for that.
The question you asked will be answered as we go further into the lesson. Because God always has a plan.
Yes.
If we look at what is going to happen next week and the week beyond, God states it clearly that he would harden Pharaoh's heart. Pharaoh had to know that the true and living God is God and not him. And the only way that could happen is if the whole process of the oppression of the Hebrew nation to their exit out of Egypt, right between those two gaps, that's where you're going to find out why God allowed that to happen.
Okay. On Friday, I'm reading from this page. Satan was the mover in this matter. He knew that a deliverer was to be raised among the Israelites, and we discussed that. And by leading the king to destroy their children, the boys, he hoped to defeat the divine purpose. But the women feared God and dare not execute the cruel mandate. The good news in all this is that despite Satan's plans, God overruled and he used faithful people to thaw the enemy. We do live in territory of one enemy, whom Jesus called the prince or ruler of this world. Satan usurped this position from Adam, but Jesus Christ defeated him in his life and through his death on the cross. Although Satan is still alive and active, as revealed in his attempt to kill those children, his own execution is certain. The good news is that life's difficulties can be overcome by God's grace, and that grace is our only hope. And to leave you with this, going back to a note from the beginning. Exodus should be studied for its points to what Jesus has done for us all. It is a book about redemption, deliverance, and final salvation, all of which are ours by faith in Christ Jesus and what he has secured for us. In the midst of the turmoil and darkness, if our eyes are fixed on God, we can recognize his presence, care, and help as he guides us to the eternal promised land. Thank